Dr. Ondina Vella had been awake for 29 hours when she called the most dangerous man in Palermo a coward to his face, and she did it in the low, curling Sicilian her grandmother had kept for men who confused a loud voice with courage. She would tell people afterward that she had not known who he was. That was almost true. At 3:40 in the morning, the trauma bay at Ospedale San Filippo smelled of iodine, cold coffee, and blood that would not stop coming. The boy on the table was 19, maybe 20, gravely wounded, with a face too young for any of it. His shirt had been cut away in strips. His skin had gone the color of candle wax. Ondina had both gloved hands pressed into his side, and she could feel his life leaving through her fingers faster than the bags of O negative could put it back. Pressure's dropping, a nurse said. 70/40, 68. More pressure here, Ondina said. Hang the second unit. Where is my ultrasound? She was a big woman, broad through the shoulders and full through the hips, and she filled the space at the head of that table the way a keel fills water, low, steady, hard to move. People who met her in daylight tended to underestimate her. They saw the soft body and the tired eyes and the cheap clogs and decided quietly that she was somebody's aunt who had wandered into the wrong wing. They were wrong within about 90 seconds, every time. Then the double doors slammed open and the room got colder. He came in the way weather comes in. Two men in dark coats entered first and simply stopped being furniture, one by each door, hands folded, eyes everywhere, and behind them, unhurried, a man in a black overcoat with snow melt still bright on his shoulders, though it had not snowed. It had rained, the kind of rain Palermo got in February that soaked a man to the bone and made him look carved out of the night. The nurses went silent. The junior resident actually stepped back from the table. Even the machines seemed to lower their voices. The man's eyes found the boy and did not leave him. "That is my brother," he said. His voice was very quiet, which was worse than loud. "You will save him. You need to get out of my trauma bay," Ondina said, without looking up. "You do not understand who I understand there is a person the size of a wardrobe standing where my crash cart needs to go." She snapped her fingers at the resident. "Move him, or I will." One of the coated men put a hand flat against Ondina's shoulder to peel her off the table. She was elbow deep in a boy's chest. She was tired down to the marrow. And something in her, some ancestral fuse that ran straight back to a kitchen in Bagheria and a grandmother who had buried two husbands and feared no man alive, simply lit. She turned her head and, in the thick backstreet Sicilian that no polished Palermo gentleman was supposed to still be able to follow, she told the man in the beautiful coat exactly what she thought of him. She told him money did not buy a heartbeat. She told him he could stand there in his fine wool and his fear and mistake noise for help, the way frightened little men always did, but he would do it against the far wall, because the only person in this room keeping his brother's blood inside his body was her, and if his gorilla touched her again, she would have them both thrown into the street to watch the boy die through the window. She said it fast and she said it filthy, and she said it because she was certain, the way you are certain of things at 3:40 in the morning, that a man who wore a watch worth more than her flat could not possibly have grown up close enough to that language to feel its edge. The room held its breath. And the most dangerous man in Palermo, the one whose name was a lowered voice, the one the coated men orbited like a dark planet, tipped his head back the smallest degree and grinned. It was not a polite grin. It was not the smile powerful men use on cameras. It arrived suddenly and entirely, transforming a face built for consequences into something almost boyish, almost delighted. And then, just as fast, it was gone. When he answered in the same gutter Sicilian. Flawless. Every curl and swallow of it. The dialect of men who had been poor first and dangerous second, which told her in 4 words that she had read him exactly wrong. "Finally," Saverio Lanza said softly, "someone in this building who isn't lying to me." He stepped back. He waved his men to the wall himself. "Save him," he said, "and you'll never scrub a public ward again unless you want to. Lose him." The grin was gone, and what replaced it had no bottom. "And speak to me in that voice one more time, so I remember there was one honest person here at the end." He folded his hands and became stone. And Ondina Vella, who had just cursed the most feared man in Sicily in the language of his own dead mother, looked down at the boy dying under her hands and understood, with a cold drop through the stomach, that she now had perhaps 4 minutes to save the one life in this city she absolutely could not afford to lose. Bellies full of blood, Dr. Amerigo Ciara announced, sweeping in on the tail of the chaos with his gown still untied. He was the senior man on nights, silver at the temples, sure of himself the way only a man who has never once doubted himself in public can be. He glanced at the monitors, glanced at the wounds, and reached his conclusion the way he reached everything, first and loudly. 2 in the abdomen. He's bleeding out into his gut. Straight to the OR. Open the belly. I'll lead. No, Ondina said. The word dropped into the room like a scalpel onto tile. Ciara looked at her then. Really looked, taking in the soft, round face, the sweat-damp curls escaping her cap, the body that did not match his idea of a surgeon, and she watched the small dismissal cross his eyes. She had seen it 10,000 times. She had stopped letting it wound her somewhere around her 2nd year. Dottoressa, he said, with a patience that was its own insult, his abdomen is bleeding, yes. It is not what's killing him this minute. She kept 2 fingers on the boy's neck. Look at his neck veins. They're standing up like cords. His pressures in the cellar and his heart sounds are muffled. I can barely hear them over the room. Distended veins, falling pressure, quiet heart. She rattled off the triad flat and fast. There is blood around his heart. It is squeezing it shut. You open his belly first, he arrests on your table before you find the second bleeder, and all your fine work won't matter, because you'll have already lost him. For half a second no one moved. Get me the ultrasound probe on his chest, Ondina said. Now, I'll show you. The resident slapped the probe into her palm. She ran it below the boy's ribs, tilted it up under the sternum, and the screen resolved into grey shapes. And there it was, a black rim of fluid pooled around the beating muscle, thick enough that the heart flickered inside it like a fish in a shrinking bowl, each beat smaller than the last. Pericardial tamponade, exactly where she'd said it would be. She heard Ciara's mouth open and close. She did not enjoy it. She was too tired to enjoy anything, and there was too little of the boy left. But something in her chest that had been braced her whole shift eased half a notch, because this, right here, was the one thing the world could never take back from her once she'd said it out loud and the machine agreed. She had been wrong about a great many things in her life. She had married one of them, but she was not wrong about a body coming apart in front of her. She had never once been wrong about that. Against the far wall, Saverio Lanza had not moved, but his eyes had changed. When she'd cursed him, he'd looked at her the way you look at a small, brave animal. Now he watched her the way you watch someone pick a lock you were told could not be picked. He needs an operating theater in the next 90 seconds, Ondina said, or he needs someone to open his chest right here on this table. I'd rather the theater. Somebody call up and tell them Vella's coming through the doors hot, and if the anesthetist isn't scrubbed by the time I am, tell him I'll do the airway myself and bill him for it. You, Ciara said, and there was real heat in it now, the heat of a proud man who has been corrected in front of witnesses. You are a registrar. This is my night, my department. Then lead, Ondina said. Lead by opening the door. She reached under her collar, out of some habit older than the conversation, and touched the small worn silver medal that hung there against her skin, Saint Agatha, patron of the body and all its wounds, the saint her grandmother had prayed to he, and tucked it back beneath the neck of her scrubs, where the sterile field would not reach it. Her grandmother had pressed it into her palm the week she qualified. For the ones, the old woman had said, that the loud men have already given up on. The brakes came off the table, they ran. And as the gurney crashed through the doors toward the lifts, Saverio Lanza's quiet voice followed her down the corridor. Not to the surgeon, not to the doctors, but to the one person in the building he had decided he believed. Dottoressa. She half turned without stopping. His face for one instant was not the face Palermo feared, it was just a man's. He is all I have left of her. Then the door swallowed the gurney, and Ondina Vella went up to open a 19-year-old's chest with the most dangerous man in Sicily left standing on the wrong side of a line she was about to draw around his brother's heart. She stopped his men at the scrub room door. There were 2 of them, and they moved to follow the gurney into the theater the way they'd have followed Saverio into a room of armed enemies. Bodies first, questions never. Ondina put herself in the doorway. She was not a small obstacle. No, she said. Signor Lanza said, Signor Lanza can say whatever he likes on his side of that red line on the floor. On this side, the only things allowed to touch the air around that boy are sterile, and neither of you has been sterile since your baptism. She held out one wet, freshly scrubbed hand, dripping, not to shake, to Bar. Guns don't clot blood. I do. Out. They looked past her, down the corridor, to where their master had appeared like a shadow detaching from the wall. Every instinct in the room said the wrong word here got someone hurt. Saverio Lanza looked at the enormous, exhausted, unafraid woman filling his men's path, water running off her elbows, and something moved at the corner of his mouth that was not quite the grin from downstairs, but was related to it. Do as she says, he told his men. Boss, she is the surgeon. He said it the way another man might say she is the law. Then to her, quieter, in the old dialect, so only she caught it. Draw your line, Dottoressa. I'll stay behind it. He stepped back, deliberately, until his shoulder touched the corridor wall, the most feared man in the city, folding himself small against the plaster to make room for the rules of a place where his name meant nothing. Just don't lose him behind it. She held his eyes exactly 1 second longer than was comfortable. Then she turned and went in, and the doors sighed shut, and the world narrowed to a single body and a clock. Under the lights, she became a different animal. This was the thing people never understood about Ondina Vella, the thing her ex-husband had spent 4 years trying to unteach her. In a room full of people watching her, waiting, she had felt them her whole life, waiting for the fat girl to drop the tray, for the loud woman to embarrass herself, for the registrar with the wrong accent to prove she didn't belong. In that kind of room, her hands could betray her. A cup could rattle, a sentence could come out wrong. But put a life open on the table in front of her, a thing that could not be faked and could not be flattered, and every tremor in her went still. Her hands over an open chest were the steadiest hands in Sicily. She had staked her whole ruined, rebuilt life on that single fact, and it had never once let her down. Sternum, she said. Saw. She opened him down the middle. The pericardium bulged up dark and taut, the sac around his heart swollen tight with trapped blood, throttling the muscle it was built to protect. She nicked it. One small, exact cut, and the pressure let go in a warm rush, and on the monitor the boy's pressure climbed off the floor for the first time in 20 minutes, one line rising like something surfacing for air. There, she breathed. There you are. But the fountain in the sack told her what she already feared. The heart itself was torn. A tear in the wall of the right ventricle, bleeding with every beat. He would lose everything through an opening no wider than a pencil unless she closed it, and she could not stop his heart to do it, because a heart that stops at his pressure does not start again. So she did the thing that separates surgeons from mechanics. She laid the pad of one finger over the tear, feeling the muscle slam against her fingertip, alive, furious, 60 times a minute, and held it shut by hand while, with the other, she placed her stitches into a moving target, timing each one to the half-beat of pause between contractions, sewing a living heart the way you thread a needle on a train. Talk to me, she said to the room, and the room talked. Pressure, rhythm, gas, units hung, and she stitched. And somewhere below her, the blood loss slowed, and stopped. She got the belly next, a bleeder off the spleen, less romantic, more forgiving. She packed it, tied it, cleaned him out. She counted her own swabs twice because she trusted no one else's count but her own. 41 in, 41 out. She'd have known if it were 40. And at 5:52 in the morning, just over 2 hours after a boy the color of a candle had come through her doors with his life running out of him, Ondina Vella stripped off her gloves, looked at a monitor showing a heartbeat that intended to keep happening, and let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding since her residency. He'll see the sunrise, she told the theater. Somebody find his brother. She did not have to find him. When she pushed out through the doors, gown soaked, cap plastered to her curls, Saverio Lanza was exactly where she'd left him, shoulder to the wall, as though he had not moved his feet in 3 hours, as though moving them might have cost the boy something. Bastiano and the 2 coated men stood a careful distance off, watching their impossible master keep a vigil in a public corridor that smelled of bleach. Saverio straightened when he saw her face. He did not ask. He was too proud to ask and too frightened to speak. He's alive, Ondina said. His heart was torn. I've closed it. The next 2 days will tell us if it holds. But right now, this minute, he's alive, and he's more comfortable than you are. For a moment the man said nothing at all. Then the feared face of Saverio Lanza simply came apart. Not into tears. He would not have permitted that, not in a hallway, not in front of his men. Into something quieter and far more naked. Relief so total it aged him and unmade him at once, his eyes closing, his head bowing, one hand rising to cover his mouth as though to hold a sound inside. When he lowered it, he looked at her, and the grin was nowhere in it. Only this. A man looking at the one person who had reached into the dark and pulled back the last thing he loved. "Whatever you want," he said low and rough. "Name it. Money. The house on the Foro, Ciara's job. I'll have you running that department by Friday. A car so you never wear those shoes on a wet floor again. Anything in this city that can be bought, Dottoressa, it is already yours. Say the word." Ondina looked at him for a long, tired beat. And then she did the last thing anyone in that corridor expected. The thing that would, without either of them yet knowing it, decide everything that came after. She laughed. "I don't want your house," she said. "I don't want Ciara's job. I'd have to be in meetings with Ciara, and I bought these shoes myself." She peeled the cap off her head, freeing the damp curls, and rubbed a hand down her exhausted face. "You want to thank me? Let me sleep 4 hours before you have anyone follow me home. And send fruit to the ward nurses, not to me. They did the parts you clapped for." She turned to go. "Vela," he said. She stopped. "No one," Saverio Lanza said slowly, as if the sentence surprised him even as he made it, "has said no to me in 11 years. Ondina glanced back over her shoulder, too worn out to be careful, and gave him the truth the way she gave everyone the truth, plainly, and with the door already half closing behind it. "Then you've been keeping the wrong company," she said, "and I've got a boy's chest to check on at 9. The lift doors opened. She stepped in. And as they slid shut on the sight of Saverio Lanza staring after her like a compass that had just, for the first time in its life, found north, Ondina Vela had absolutely no idea that she would not be getting rid of Saverio Lanza. Not that morning. Not that spring. Not, as it would turn out, ever. Tancredi Lanza woke on the second day and asked for the woman who swore. He surfaced slowly out of the drugs, a tube down his throat and a repaired heart ticking behind a wall of staples, and the first thing he did once the tube came out and his cracked voice came back was rasp a question at the nurse leaning over him. She didn't understand it at first. He tried again. "The doctor," he whispered. "The one who cursed at my brother. Where is she?" Ninetta, the night nurse, laughed so hard she had to sit down, because everyone on the ward knew. It had gone through the hospital like fire through dry grass. The fat registrar from Ballarò who'd told Saverio Lanza to his face, in his mother's dialect, that his money couldn't buy a heartbeat, and lived. They were half frightened of Ondina now, and half in love with her, which, she would come to learn, was roughly how Tancredi felt too. He decided, in the way that 19-year-olds who have nearly died decide things, that she was his. He would not let the other doctors touch him without her in the room. He panicked when the physiotherapist came alone, and settled the instant Ondina appeared in the doorway. He saved his questions for her. Was the scar going to be ugly? Could he still swim? Was it true she'd sewn his heart shut while it was still beating? Was that disgusting? Could she describe it in detail? He called her Dottoressa the first day, Ondina by the third, and Zia Auntie by the end of the week, which made her throat go tight in a way she did not examine, and where the boy went, the brother followed. Saverio Lanza began appearing on a public ward at hours when men like him were supposed to be somewhere expensive. He looked wrong there and did not seem to care. He sat in the cheap vinyl chair by Tancredi's bed in a coat worth more than the chair's entire ward, and he listened to his brother talk, and every so often his eyes would find Ondina moving down the row of beds, checking a drain here, arguing with Sciarra there, sitting on the edge of a frightened old man's mattress to explain his own x-ray to him in words he could hold. And something in the boss's face would go very still and unreadable. He never asked her for anything on those visits. That was the strange part. He brought her nothing, offered her nothing, tried to buy her nothing. He had learned, apparently, from the corridor. He simply came, and watched the one person in Palermo who treated his brother like a boy and not like a Lanza, and left when visiting hours ended like any other man told to go home. Then, on the 9th night, Tancredi's heart stumbled. An arrhythmia, his repaired ventricle protesting, his rhythm skittering, the monitor screaming. Not fatal, not yet. But the boy woke into it terrified, chest on fire, certain he was dying again. and he would not let the on-call team near him. He thrashed, he pulled at his lines, he screamed one word over and over until it stopped being a word. Ondina, Ondina. And the night team could do nothing but hold him down and watch his numbers get worse from the fear alone. Which is how Ondina Vella came to open her own door at 3 in the morning and find Saverio Lanza standing on her landing. She lived at the top of a narrow building in the Albergheria, 4 flights up over a shuttered fishmonger, in 3 small rooms that smelled of drying chilies and her grandmother's copper pot. It was hers. After the marriage, after everything Corrado had slowly taken, this leaning little flat with its rooftop tomatoes and its one good chair was the first thing in 15 years that belonged to no one but her, and she loved every crooked centimeter of it precisely because no one else got a vote in it. And now Saverio Lanza was on the landing, rain in his hair again, and behind him on the stairs stood Bastiano, and the whole quiet building seemed to hold its breath. He could have sent men. He could have had Bastiano put her in a car whether she liked it or not. That was how his world moved things. Instead, he had come himself, 4 flights up in the dark, and he had knocked, and now he was waiting, not pushing past her, not stepping in, just standing at the edge of her doorway with his hands open at his sides. "He's asking for you," Saverio said. "Only you. His heart." His voice, the quiet voice all of Palermo feared, caught on the word. "Please!" She had never heard him say that word before. She suspected very few people had. "Give me 90 seconds and my shoes," Ondina said, and turned back into her flat and did not tell him he could come in. He didn't. When she came out, coat over her nightclothes, he had not moved a step. He stood on the right side of her threshold, waiting. At the hospital, she did the thing she did. She did not raise her voice to match the boys. She sent the 3 people pinning his arms out into the corridor. She sat on the edge of his bed where he could see all of her, took his hand, and got low and slow and quiet, and told him she was going to explain to him exactly what his heart was doing and why it did not mean what he thought it meant. She did not hush him. She informed him. She gave the frightened animal in him something to do with its mind, and she stayed inside his line of sight, and she let him grip her hand hard enough to bruise, and gradually, the way a spooked thing comes down when nothing in the room is chasing it, the boy's rhythm steadied under the drugs and his breathing slowed to match hers. Saverio stood in the doorway and watched her talk his brother's heart back into its own rhythm, and did not say a word. When it was over, when Tancredi had finally slid down into a real sleep with her hand still trapped in his, Ondina looked up and found the boss watching her with an expression she had no file for. Not gratitude, not the compass needle look from the corridor. Something more dangerous than either. "You do that on purpose," he said quietly. "Stay where they can see you. Never pull. Let them come to you." "It works on anything with a heartbeat," Ondina said, easing her fingers free of the sleeping boy's grip. "Frightened dogs, frightened children, frightened old men on the ward." She stood, tired to the bone. "Frightened kings, probably. I've never had the chance to test it." She meant it as a joke. Saverio Lanza did not smile. He looked at her for a long moment in the blue light of the monitors, and when he finally spoke it was in the old dialect, low, so the sleeping boy would not stir. "Be careful, Dottoressa," he said. "You are teaching a very dangerous man how much he likes being told to sit down." And he turned and walked out before she could decide whether that had been a warning about him or about her. After that, he stopped pretending he came only for Tancredi. The boy went home to the Lanza house on the hill to finish healing, and by every law of sense that should have been the end of it, patient discharged, debt paid, the fat registrar and the Mafia king going back to their opposite ends of Palermo. Instead, Saverio Lanza found reasons. Tancredi's follow-up scans. A question about his medication that could have been a phone call. And then, when even those ran out, no reason at all. Just his black car idling at the end of her narrow street in the Albergheria at the end of her shift, and Bastiano holding the door and the boss himself saying it was on his way, which it never was. He offered her things at first, the way his world taught him to. A consultant's post at the private clinic on the coast, triple her salary, no nights. She said no. She liked her nights, and the people who died at 3 in the morning in the poor quarters were exactly the people she'd become a surgeon to keep alive, and they did not tend to have private clinics on the coast. He offered to buy her a car so she'd stop taking the bus in the rain. She said no. He had a case of Etna wine sent to her flat. She had Bastiano carry all 12 bottles back down the 4 flights and told him to give them to the ward nurses, who had earned them. He sent a coat, beautiful gray, soft as sin, cut for exactly her shape, which meant someone had studied her shape, which she chose not to think about. She sent it back with a note that said, "I already own a coat." He looked each time a thing came back to him, like a man watching water flow uphill. "Why?" he asked her once, standing in her cramped kitchen while she stirred a pot. "Do you refuse everything I put in front of you?" "Because everything you put in front of me comes with a hook in it," Ondina said. "Even when you don't mean it to. That's what money does in your hands. It turns into a leash, and I spent 4 years on the end of a nicer leash than any you could buy me, so I've developed an allergy." His jaw moved. He did not ask about the 4 years, but she saw him file it. What he could not buy his way into, he learned to earn his way into instead. And that was how the rituals began. She cooked. It was the thing she did with love because she had never learned another way to say it out loud. Her grandmother had been the same, feeding the whole street out of a pot that never seemed to empty. So she made maku, the old fava bean soup of the poor, thick and green and peasant plain, the kind of thing a man like Saverio Lanza had surely not eaten since he was a barefoot boy, before he was anything. The first night she set a bowl in front of him without a word, he looked at it like she'd handed him a live grenade. "What is this?" he said. "Fava beans, wild fennel, the last of my good oil, and the fact that I made too much." She sat down across from him with her own bowl. "You're a grown man. You've eaten worse, probably in worse company." He ate it. He ate all of it. He did not say anything about it, but he came back the next week, and she noticed he'd started arriving at the exact hour the soup was ready, and she would deny this to her grave, making a little too much on purpose. He learned her flat the way you learn a language. He learned that the second chair wobbled and gave it to her and took the wobble himself. He learned to grind her coffee by hand the way she liked it, coarse, because the good machine had been Corrado's and she'd left it behind on principle. He learned to leave his enormous coat on the hook by the door and his enormous world out on the landing with Bastiano, and to bring, when he came, one loaf from the bakery on Via Chiavettieri that she'd once said made the only bread in Palermo worth the walk. He read case files at her table while she cooked. She left the good chair for him and pretended she hadn't. Only once did the two worlds collide over money, and it told her everything. He'd found the tin, her grandmother's old biscuit tin, painted with faded roses, that lived on the shelf above the stove and held, in soft folded banknotes, everything Ondina had managed to save toward the only thing she truly wanted. She caught him looking at it, and saw the exact moment his face began helplessly to do arithmetic. "Don't," she said. "I haven't said anything. Your face is writing a check. Put your face away." She took the tin down, and because he had earned a little of the truth by then, she opened it and showed him. "It's for a clinic. A real one, free, in the Albergheria, in Ballarò. In the quarters where the ambulance takes 40 minutes to climb the stairs and people bleed out on their own kitchen floors waiting. My grandmother died in a corridor at San Filippo because the loud men decided the paying patients came first. I'm going to build a place where they don't come first." She closed the tin. "And I'm going to build it with this, slowly, mine, not with your money, because your money would make it yours." Saverio Lanza looked at the little tin of soft banknotes, an amount he probably spent on a dinner, and then at the woman guarding it like a lioness, and for a long moment he said nothing at all. "How much," he finally asked, very carefully, "would you accept as a loan, on terms, written, repayable, with no hook?" "There's no such thing as your money without a hook." "Then write the terms yourself," he said. "You don't trust my paper, fine. Make paper you trust and I'll sign it and you'll hold the pen." He leaned back. "You believe I can't give without taking. Prove me wrong on a page, Dottoressa, and dare me to keep to it." It stopped her that, because it was, she realized, the first offer he'd made her that respected the thing she was actually afraid of instead of trying to bypass it. She didn't say yes. But that night, after he'd gone, she got out a sheet of paper and she began, just to see how it felt, to write down what a gift with no leash would have to look like, and she noticed she was almost smiling. She was in serious trouble and she knew it, and the worst part was that she'd started measuring her weeks by the sound of one particular knock. The call came on a Tuesday, and it undid 4 years of careful stitching in 9 seconds. She almost didn't answer. An unknown number, the middle of a shift, but she was between cases, and her thumb moved before her sense did, and then his voice was in her ear, smooth and warm and reasonable, and every muscle in her back drew up toward her skull. Ondina, it's Corrado, Dr. Corrado Ferro, her ex-husband, a vascular surgeon of some reputation and enormous charm, silver-tongued and iron-handed, the man she had spent her 20s trying to be good enough for, and her 30s learning she never could have been, because the goal had been designed to move. I heard something interesting, he said, and she could hear the smile in it, the fond, condescending smile she used to fold herself smaller to fit. I heard my ex-wife has gotten herself tangled up with Saverio Lanza. The Lanza, Ondina. A soft laugh. I'm not calling to judge. I'm calling because somebody who once cared about you should tell you the truth, and God knows you never could hear it from anyone but me. I'm at work, Corrado. Men like that collect unusual things, he went on gently, as if she hadn't spoken, in the voice that had always sounded like kindness until you were alone with the bruise it left. A loud woman, a big woman, a surgeon from Ballarot who curses in dialect. You're a novelty to a man like that, Cara. Novelties get returned. You always did mistake attention for love. I'm only saying it because someone should, before you humiliate yourself. Try not to make a scene when it ends. A pause. You do make scenes. She hung up. Her hand was shaking. That was the thing he had done to her, the thing that had taken years to name. He had gotten inside her hands. Corrado Ferro had spent 4 years standing at the edge of every room, waiting, patient, certain, for her to drop something, spill something, say something too loudly, and then explaining to whoever was watching that this was simply Ondina, too much, too clumsy, too eager, a woman who turned a dinner party into an emergency. And her body had learned the lesson so deeply that even now, years free of him, whenever she felt watched, whenever she felt someone waiting for her to fail, her steady surgeon's hands would betray her and tremble like a girl's. She had married him because he was brilliant, and she had believed him when he said no one else would put up with her. She had stayed because leaving felt like signing his verdict, that she couldn't manage a marriage, a home, a life, that she was exactly as much and exactly as ruinous as he'd always said. And when she finally walked out with 2 suitcases and her grandmother's copper pot, she had done it certain, in the deepest part of her, that he'd been right, and that she was walking into a life she'd failed to hold. Saverio found her on the ward stairwell 20 minutes later, still not steady, and stopped. He didn't ask what was wrong. He had learned somewhere, the same thing she'd tried to teach him at his brother's bedside. Don't chase the frightened thing. He simply sat down on the cold step a careful distance from her, forearms on his knees, looking out at nothing, and let her have the silence until she chose to fill it. There was a man, she said at last. My husband. There isn't any more. But he left his voice inside me, and sometimes it uses my own mouth to speak. Saverio's face did something quiet and terrible. What did he say to you just now? That I'm a novelty, that you'll get bored, that I make scenes. She laughed, and it came out wet. The worst part is I can't always tell his voice from mine anymore. For a long time he said nothing. Then, still looking out at the corridor, he told her a small piece of himself, the first he had ever offered without being cut open for it. Everyone who came to me after I had power, he said, came because I was useful or because they were afraid. My own brother by blood sold where I slept to men who wanted me dead, when I was young. That's a story for a colder night. The point is, Dottoressa, I know something about voices that live in you after the mouth is gone. I have a few of my own. He turned his head and looked at her then, dark eyes very steady. You don't ruin rooms. I've watched you walk into the worst rooms in that hospital and make them quieter. That man taught you to flinch at the wrong second so he could point at the flinch. It was a con. You were never the mess. You were the mark. Her eyes filled. She hated it. She looked away. Borrow my voice, Saverio said quietly. Absolutely. Until you can hear your own again. Mine's louder than his. It's had more practice. And she almost let herself lean the whole weight of 4 years into that. But that was the night Bastiano came up the stairwell with his phone in his hand and his face wrong, and bent to Saverio's ear, and murmured something in words too low for her to catch. And she watched the man beside her change, watched the tenderness drop off his face like a mask hitting the floor, watched something cold and old and lethal come up underneath it, watched his eyes flick to her once, fast and then away, already deciding something. Already she would realize far too late, deciding something about her, and for her, without her. "What is it?" she said. "Saverio, what?" "Nothing," said Saverio, and stood and buttoned his coat. "Go home, Ondina. Lock your door tonight. I'll send Bastiano to the end of your street." "Saverio!" But he was already moving, already gone, already miles away behind his own eyes, and for the first time since a boy had bled out under her hands and his brother had grinned at her curses, Ondina Vella felt the temperature of the whole thing change, and did not yet know why. The romantic rival arrived carrying blueprints, which was worse than flowers. Dr. Ezio Camarata transferred up from Catania to run reconstructive surgery, and within a month he had done the one thing no man at San Filippo had managed in years. He had made Ondina Vella feel like the most interesting person in the room without once making her feel watched. He was easy, warm, quick to laugh. The kind of surgeon who knelt on a filthy floor to be at eye level with a burned child and never once acted as though it cost him anything. He asked Ondina's opinion and then wrote it down. He asked it again the next day. And then he found out about the clinic. "A free trauma point in the Albergheria," he said, spreading a hand-drawn plan across the doctor's lounge table one evening, eyes bright. "I've been dreaming about the same thing for the Zen Quarter. Ondina, we could do this together. Two of us, we could actually build it. You've got the trauma, I've got the reconstruction, we split the nights." He laughed at his own excitement. "Tell me I'm not mad." He put his hand on her arm when he said it. Just briefly, the way colleagues do. "You're not mad," Ondina said, and something in her chest lifted, because here was a man offering her the exact thing she wanted with no hook in it at all. No ownership, no leash, just partnership, an equal on the other side of the same dream. She did not see Saverio in the doorway. He'd come to walk her home. He stood there in his dark coat with the bakery loaf in his hand, and he watched the reconstructive surgeon make Ondina Vella laugh over a set of blueprints, watched the man's hand rest on her arm and her not pull away, and something moved across the boss's face that Palermo's enemies would have recognized and run from. He said nothing about it on the walk home. He said nothing about it over the soup. But she caught him being quiet in a new way, and she found she rather enjoyed it, and she was honest enough with herself to know that was a bad sign. The reckoning came at the Lanza house. Saverio held an evening for Tancredi's recovery, Palermo's careful society climbing the hill in dark cars, a house of stone and old money and newer blood, and Ondina in a green dress she'd bought with her own money, feeling every eye clock her body and file her under how odd. She'd have been fine, she was almost fine. And then Ippolita Dano found her by the terrace doors. Ippolita was everything the world expected a man like Saverio to want: long, cold, flawless, the daughter of an allied family, spoken of for years as the queen the king would eventually take. She looked at Ondina, the way one prices a thing one has no intention of buying. "So you're the surgeon," she said, smiling. "The one from Balero who says such colorful things. How charming. How novel." The word landed exactly where Corrado had planted its twin. "You should enjoy it, cara. Men like Saverio collect unusual pieces. A big, loud, clever woman from the market quarters. It's very amusing for a season." Her smile sharpened. "But he'll marry a house, not a hobby. They always do. Do try not to break anything on your way out. I hear you're clumsy." And there it was. The whole room turned faintly toward them. The old sensation, the waiting. Ondina felt her hand tighten on her glass, felt the familiar tremor start up her wrist, felt Corrado's voice and Ippolita's voice braid into one and reach for her fingers. Then Tancredi was there. He came across the room too fast for a boy with a healing heart, and he put himself at Ondina's side, and he said, loudly enough for the terrace to hear, "Ippolita, this is the woman who held my heart shut with her hand so I could be at your boring party. What have you ever held shut with your hand?" And he grinned. His brother's grin. Exactly. And took Ondina's arm, the steady one. The tremor stopped. Because that was the truth of her, the thing Corrado had worked 4 years to keep from her. Her hands shook only when she believed someone was waiting for her to fail. The instant something living needed her, the instant she remembered what she actually was, they went still as stone. She set down her glass. She looked at Ippolita Dano, and she did not raise her voice. "You're right that I'm clumsy," Ondina said. "I drop glasses at parties. I say the wrong thing. I take up more room than the women you're used to in every possible way. The terrace had gone silent. She let it. But when something bleeds, when something is frightened or breaking or dying on a floor, my hands don't shake at all. So you keep watching the glasses, Kara. I'll keep watching what matters. One of us will be useful in an emergency, and it won't be the one in the perfect dress. No one laughed at her. For the first time in her life, in a room like that, no one laughed at her. Ippolita's face went white and then red. Saverio, across the room, had gone rigid, and there was something in his eyes that was not amusement and was not pride and was larger than both. He found her later in the quiet of the library corridor, music leaking faintly through the walls. You didn't defend me, Ondina said. Out there, you just watched. You didn't need defending, Saverio said. You needed the floor, so I gave you the floor. He stepped closer and stopped, a careful arm's length away. The reconstructive surgeon. Ezio. I know his name. I've disliked it for 3 weeks. His jaw tightened. He put his hand on your arm and offered you the thing you want most in the world, and I stood in a doorway holding bread like a fool, because the one thing I cannot buy you, Kara, is a dream you built yourself. He exhaled. I am jealous. I have not been jealous since I was a poor boy with nothing to be jealous with. I find I have no idea how to do it with dignity. Ondina's heart was doing something complicated. Jealousy isn't love, she said quietly, testing it. No, Saverio agreed, but it is honest. And I have told you very few honest things in my life that cost me anything. He looked at her, the most dangerous man in Palermo, undone in a hallway. That one cost me something. She closed the distance before her courage could become one more thing she dropped, and she kissed him. He went utterly still, hands at his sides, as though he had not earned them, until she took his wrist and set his hand at her waist herself and told him against his mouth that he was allowed. Only then did he hold her, carefully, like a man handling something he had waited his whole hard life to be trusted with. When they broke apart, his forehead against hers, he murmured, "The reconstructive surgeon is going to be very disappointed." "You're still jealous," she said, laughing. "Violently. I'm managing it." He kissed the corner of her mouth. "Poorly, but I'm managing it." The night that broke them open did not happen in a bedroom. It happened 3 nights later, at 2 in the morning, when Tancredi's mind finally caught up with his body and gave him back the shooting in full. Ondina had stayed late at the Lanza house going over the boys' scans. She was half asleep in a guest room when the screaming started, and she was through the door before she was fully awake. He was in the corner of his room, wedged between the wardrobe and the wall, hands over his ears, gone somewhere no one could follow, back on the pavement, back in the 3 seconds when the world turned to fire and noise and everything came apart. He did not know the house. He did not know the year. When the night nurse reached for him, he swung at her, terrified, and his monitor, he was still wired for it, began to climb, his repaired heart hammering toward the red. Saverio arrived at a run and did the thing his whole life had taught him. He filled the doorway and gave a command, hard and flat, the voice that moved armed men. "Tancredi, stop." The boy's heart jumped higher. "You're making the room louder than the thing he's afraid of," Ondina said. "Stop being the storm." Saverio turned on her, and she saw the resistance move through him. No one told Saverio Lanza to lower his voice in his own house. "Sit down," she said. "On the floor, slowly, where he can see all of you, and none of you is coming toward him." For one taut second, the king did not obey. Then the most dangerous man in Palermo lowered himself onto the floor of his brother's bedroom and put his hands flat on the cold tile where the boy could see them, and did as the surgeon said. Ondina sat on Tancredi's other side, leaving a clear space so the boy was cornered by no one. She did not touch him. She did not shush him. She flattened her own palm on the tile and, in the old dialect, her grandmother's dialect, the plain, deep language underneath the fear, she began, very low, to say the names of true things: bread, salt, stone, water, the cold of the floor, the weight of his own hand, the sound of the sea through the window, bread, salt, stone. Not soothing sounds, true ones, small and real and impossible to argue with, the way you talk a drowning mind back to solid ground, one plain word at a time. She said them slow, and she breathed slow, and she let the boy grip nothing but the floor and her voice. "Put your hand near his," she murmured to Saverio. "Not on him. Near." Saverio slid his hand across the tile until it lay a few inches from his brother's, and they waited, the surgeon and the boss, On the floor, in the dark, two people who had spent their whole lives being the strongest thing in every room, doing the hardest thing either had ever done, which was nothing. Just staying. Just breathing where a frightened creature could match them. Tancredi's breath hitched, slowed, hitched. And then, by the smallest degree, the boy's hand slid the last inch and closed over his brother's, and his heartbeat came down off the ledge, and he sagged sideways into the wall and began, quietly, to cry. A boy again, in his own house, safe. They got him to bed. They sat on the floor beside it while he slept, backs against the frame, the space between them warm. He matched us, Saverio said, very low, wondering. Tonight he needed both of us. She let her head tip back against the mattress. Usually one is enough. For a while, neither spoke. Then he told her the rest of it, the cold night story, the one he'd promised, how he'd come up from nothing, the poorest boy in a poor house, and how the brother born between him and Tancredi, a grown man, jealous and afraid, had sold Saverio's location to the men who wanted him dead, for money and a promise. How Saverio had survived it at 24, bleeding, in a doorway, and had understood in that doorway that every human being he would ever meet from then on would come to him with a price attached. Every friend, every ally, every woman, all of them calculating what his power was worth to them. All of them except a boy his mother had left behind, too young to know what a lanza was. That is why Tancredi is all of her I have left, he said, and why I trust nothing that comes to me easily. Everyone I have ever known met me after I was worth something. He turned his head and looked at her in the dark. You met me covered in my brother's blood, and you told me to get against the wall. Romantic, Ondina said, and he almost laughed. Then he asked her the question that undid her. Who does this for you? He said. When the room gets louder than the danger, when that man's voice uses your mouth, who sits on the floor beside you and says the plain true words until you can hear your own heart again? She tried to make it a joke. Nothing came. Nobody, she said. The word was too true and came out too bare. People mostly wait to see what I'll drop. Saverio was quiet for a moment. Then he reached over and took her hand, the steady one, and turned it in his, and pressed his mouth to her knuckles, rough and careful, the way he did everything he was afraid of wanting. Then they were watching the wrong moment, he said. Every one of them. Nothing more happened that night. Neither of them reached for more. They sat on the floor of a sleeping boy's room with their hands folded together, and it was, for both of them, the closest thing to being fully known that either had felt in years. It was enough. It was almost unbearably enough, which is exactly how much there was to lose. 3 weeks of quiet happiness, and then Saverio's world reached out and touched her, and he broke every promise he'd made in a single afternoon, for the best of reasons, which is the only way a good man ever breaks the important ones. Bastiano found it first, a photograph left where it was meant to be found, of Ondina Vella, climbing the 4 flights to her flat in the Albergheria, Tancredi laughing at her side, a red circle around her face, and on the back, in a stranger's hand. Even a king can be led by the throat if you know which pet he loves. It was Turi Restivo, a rival off the harbor, ambitious, minor, the kind of man who mistakes another man's tenderness for a lever. He had found the one soft place in Saverio Lanza's armor, and he had drawn a circle around it. Saverio read the message once, and the boy in the doorway at 24, the boy who had learned that love was a location someone could sell, came fully awake in the man, and drowned everything Ondina had spent 3 months teaching him. By noon, he had doubled the guard. By 2, he had decided the Albergheria could not be secured. By 4, when Ondina climbed her 4 flights after a double shift, she opened her own door onto a hollow flat. Her books gone from the shelves, her copper pot gone from the hook, the rose-painted tin gone from above the stove, all of it moved without a word to a fortified suite in the Lanza house, where someone had tried to rebuild her whole small life from memory. Her books on a stranger's shelf, her pot on a marble counter, her grandmother's tin set beside a vase that cost more than everything the tin had ever held. Saverio was waiting there when they brought her. "What is this?" she said. "You're safe now." He handed her the photograph like it explained him. "Until Restivo is handled, you stay here, behind my walls, where you can what?" Her voice was very quiet. "Where you moved my life 300 meters without asking me a single question." There was nothing to ask. His jaw was iron. There was a threat, and I removed you from it. That is what I do, Ondina. I see danger and I take away its options. You took away mine. The words cracked out of her. She was shaking now, not the old tremor, something bigger. You sat on the floor of your brother's room and learned to let a frightened thing come to you. You stood at my door at 3 a.m. and you waited, because you understood that the whole of who I am is that I don't get dragged, I get asked. You watched me do it 100 times. And the first time you were frightened, her voice broke and she let it. The first time you were the scared one, you grabbed me by the collar and called it protection. Where is the man who waited at my door? This is different. That's what every one of them believes. She was crying and furious and would not look away. Their fear is special. Their reason is urgent. Their cage is love. Corrado never once raised his hand to me, Saverio. He just always knew better than I did what I needed. He took my keys for my safety. He cancelled my life for my own good. And I stayed, because leaving felt like admitting he was right, that I couldn't run my own life. She spread her arms at the perfect, terrible reconstruction of her home. And now you've built me a nicer cage and put my grandmother's tin in it, and I'm supposed to feel grateful. Do not, said Saverio, and the anger flared up hot in his eyes. Compare me to that man. Ondina's whole body braced, flinched, old muscle memory, bone deep, the flinch Corrado had taught her. And Saverio saw it. He saw her body get ready to be hurt, and the anger went out of him like a snuffed flame, and horror came up in its place, because he had, in that instant, become exactly the thing. He stepped back at once. He put distance between them with his own feet. You're frightened of me, he said, hollow. I'm frightened of how easily you decided my no didn't count, she said, because you never bothered to hear it. The silence went on too long. In the doorway, Tancredi stood, looking between them, stricken. What do you want? Saverio said at last, ruined. My life back, my flat, my choices. The albergheria isn't safe. Then I'll leave the Lanza house and the albergheria. Somewhere new, somewhere that's mine. She was already gathering the tin, the pot, the metal warm against her throat. Ondina, he said it low. The boy needs you. The instant it left his mouth, she watched the regret hit him, watched him understand what he'd done. Don't, she said, and her voice shook worse than her hands ever had. Don't you dare use him. I taught that boy that being loved is not the same as being owned. Do not make me prove the same thing to you by walking out that door with his face in the way. You're right. It came out of Saverio instantly, and it cost him everything. You're right. I should not have. Forgive me, not for the rest of it, but for that. I should not have used him. She looked at Tancredi, the boy whose heart she'd sewn shut, who had chosen her, who was standing in a doorway watching the two people he loved tear a hole in each other, and the pain in her chest was so sharp she had to breathe around it. One driver, she said. Not a convoy. He drops me and he leaves. And you do not have me followed, Saverio. If you mean any of the words you've said to me, you let me be somewhere you don't know how to reach. Every instinct in him refused. She watched it refuse. And then, because he had heard her at least this once, Saverio bowed his head and said, One driver. She took only what was hers. He had the rest returned to her emptied flat, arranged exactly as it had been, as though undoing it could undo him. And Ondina Vella moved that night into a single rented room above a print shop in a quarter where no Lanza had reason to go. A narrow bed, a hot plate, a window over an alley, a room with nothing beautiful in it except that not one thing in it had been chosen by anyone but her. She set the tin on the sill. She hung the metal on the lamp. And she sat on the strange bed in the dark and did not cry because she had finally, at enormous cost, done the one thing Corrado had bet his whole marriage she could never do. She had left while she still had the strength to. He did not call. That was the thing that told her, more than anything, that something in him had heard her. Saverio Lanza, who had never in his life let a door stay closed, let this one stay closed. He sent one message the morning after, and only one. I watched you give my brother a choice 100 times and believed my fear excused taking yours. It did not. Your home is restored exactly. Your wages and the clinic terms, unsigned, yours to burn, are with the boy. I will not reach for you again unless you reach first. S. She read it every night for a week, She did not answer. Instead, she worked. She let Ezio Camerata put his blueprints beside hers, and she said yes to the clinic. A real yes, on paper, 2 surgeons and a dream in the poor quarter, no king's money in it. She took a certification course in trauma-informed care she'd wanted for years and never had the evenings for. She discovered that the rented room over the print shop, ugly as it was, held her sleep better than the fortified suite ever could have because no one on earth could open its door but her. She grew. It hurt the entire time. Both were true, and across the city, in a house of stone, Saverio Lanza did the hardest thing he had ever done, which was to keep his word while it killed him, because Tancredi grieved her. The boy stopped eating properly. He asked every day when Zia was coming back, and every day his brother had to tell him the truth, that she wasn't, that it was Saverio's fault, that some things a man breaks cannot be commanded back into shape. Tancredi wept and raged, and once shouted that Saverio ruined everything he loved because he loved it too hard, and Saverio took it standing because it was true. And here is what Saverio did not do. He did not photograph the grieving boy and send it to her. He did not let Tancredi call her and cry down the phone. He did not once in all those weeks turn the boy's broken heart into a message with Ondina's name on the envelope, though it would have worked, and he knew it would have worked, and every hour it was there for the taking. I taught him love is not a leash, Saverio told Bastiano, the one man he could say it to. I will not make his grief into one, not even to get her back, especially not to get her back. He sat with the boy in the dark instead, and said the plain true words she'd taught him, bread, salt, stone, badly, in his rough grief, until the boy slept. He spoke to the only creature alive who had known him before power, and he said once low, she told me exactly what she was. I heard every word. I just didn't change the thing underneath the hearing. That's the whole of it, little brother. She's not gone because she stopped loving me. She's gone because I made loving me cost her too much. Turi Restivo, meanwhile, learned that reaching for Saverio Lanza's soft place had been the last poor decision of his career in Palermo, though not in the way Restivo expected, and not, it would turn out, in the way the old Saverio would have answered it. But that comes later. What matters is the 3rd week. What matters is that Tancredi Lanza, 19 years old, a repaired heart in his chest, and his brother's stubbornness in his blood, woke one morning and decided that if the 2 people he loved were too proud and too wounded to cross the city to each other, then he would do it for them. He waited until the guard changed, and then the boy was gone. The knock came at Ondina's door at 9 in the evening, in the rain, and it was not the knock she'd spent 3 weeks refusing to hope for. It was frantic, low, wrong. She opened the door onto Tancredi Lanza, soaked to the skin, grey-faced, one hand pressed to his sternum, swaying on his feet at the top of the print shop stairs. He had crossed the whole city, bus, then walking, then just walking, miles of it, a boy 3 months out from open-chest surgery who had no business climbing a single flight, to stand at her door with the unsigned clinic papers clutched to his chest inside his jacket, keeping them dry. "Zia," he gasped. "I fixed it, I came to fix it." And then his knees went. She caught him, all of him, the way he'd once needed catching, and got him down onto her narrow bed, and her hands. God, her hands did not shake, they never shook when it mattered. They were already at his pulse, already counting, already reading the skitter in his rhythm that told her his repaired heart was in trouble from the strain. Too fast, too irregular, not fatal, not yet. But the boy had nearly killed himself getting to her. "You impossible, ridiculous child," she breathed, easing him flat, working as she scolded. "You absolute Lanza. What were you thinking?" "I was thinking," Tancredi managed, grey and grinning his brother's grin, "that you 2 are cowards and somebody had to walk." Headlights swept the alley below. She knew whose they were before the footsteps reached the stairs. Her whole body knew. Saverio stopped in the open doorway. Rain in his hair, his face a wreck of fear. He'd followed the boy, of course, not closely enough to turn him back, close enough to be here. His eyes went first to his brother, cataloguing him, alive, breathing, safe, and then to Ondina, on her knees on the floor with the boy's pulse under her fingers. He did not come in. The most dangerous man in Palermo stood at the threshold of a rented room over a print shop, water running off his coat, powerful enough to own the building and everything around it, and he stood in the doorway, and he waited. "Is he—" his voice failed. His voice— "Ondina, is he—" "He's stable. His rhythm's off from the strain, he needs rest and he needs monitoring and he needs his backside kicked, but he's going to be fine." She looked up at him, and the whole arc of them was in the space between his shoes and her floor. The door he'd waited at once, the suite he'd filled without asking, the threshold where he now stood soaked and still, close enough to reach her, choosing not to take the step. He walked across the city with your loan papers pressed to his chest so they wouldn't get wet. Saverio closed his eyes. "May I come in?" he said. 4 words, the whole of it in 4 words. Every door in their history was in them, the one he'd knocked on and waited at, the one he'd torn open and filled with a cage. This one, where he stood powerful and drenched and asking, having finally, at the cost of everything, understood the difference. Ondina looked at the boy breathing on her bed, and at the man waiting in her door. "You can come in," she said. He wiped his shoes on the mat without being asked. He crossed the small room and lowered himself to the floor, not onto the bed, not over her, down onto the same level, an arm's length off, and he waited until the boy shifted toward him before he laid a hand near his brother's. "I thought protection meant taking away every risk," he said quietly, watching Tancredi's breathing settle. "It's how I stayed alive. It's the only love I knew how to give. I put the people I loved behind walls, and I called the walls devotion." He lifted his eyes to hers. "I did not understand that safety chosen for someone feels exactly like a cage. You told me that. In those words, I heard the words. It took the boy nearly killing himself for me to feel them." "I told you," Ondina said. Her eyes were wet. "You did." A tired, broken thing that was almost a smile. "And now I'm a man sitting on a print shop floor in wet trousers, terrified, asking permission to stay in a room." He shook his head. "It isn't very frightening." "It's more impressive than the walls," she said, "by a long way." They monitored the boy between them through the night. She rigged what she could, called Ezio for a portable monitor without a flicker of jealousy from Saverio, who had, it seemed, finally understood which things were worth being afraid of and which were not. And somewhere in the small hours, with Tancredi asleep and stable and the rain gone soft, they finished it. "Restivo," she said. "The man who circled my face. Handled." He said it, and then, because he was learning to give her the true thing even when it cost him. "Not the way I would have handled it 4 months ago. I wanted to. I wanted to answer a photograph of your face with something that would make every man in Palermo afraid to look at you again. And then I heard you in my head. You told me once that answering everything with blood only proves fear still runs me. So I did it the slower way. He's gone from the city. His people came to mine. No one died for the circle he drew around you." His jaw tightened. "I dislike how often your sentences survive inside my decisions." "Good," she said. "I love you," Saverio said, simply, into the quiet. "I loved you when you told me to get against a wall. I loved you when you fed me the soup of poor men and dared me to be too proud for it. I loved the way my brother's heart beat calm under your hand. I loved that you sent back every gift and kept every one of my honest words." His voice roughened. "And I loved you badly once, when fear made me build you a cage. I will never again ask you to call that love. It wasn't. It was the old wound wearing my face." Ondina's breath came unsteady. "I love you too," she said. "I'm certain of that. I'm not certain love makes either of us easy. I'm loud and I take up room, and I will send back every leash you ever hand me wrapped as a gift. And you're a king who's spent 40 years being obeyed." "I'm recovering," Saverio said. "From the obeying. It's slow." She laughed, wet, and it made his whole face change, the way it had changed the very first night, over her curses, in the blood. She set the terms, and she set them out loud. The clinic loan, on the paper she'd write, that she could repay and walk away from clean. Her own place, the flat restored, hers, on a lease in her name, or somewhere new, her choice, not his. The clinic with Ezio, purely and only a partnership, which Saverio would keep his jealous hands and his checkbook out of, and the choice, always at every door, hers. "I'll hate the repayment clauses," Saverio said, "every one of them." "That's not a no," Ondina said. "It is not a no." She reached over the sleeping boy, who had walked across the city to fix them, and she took the king by his wet collar, and she kissed him, first, and choosing it. And this time, when his hands rose, they did not hesitate, though they were gentle, because he had finally learned that this was a thing they were building together, and not a thing either of them was allowed to take. 5 months later, the clinic opened its doors in the Albergheria, and Ondina Vella did not walk into it as anyone's employee, anyone's novelty, or anyone's pet. She had built it. Her savings and her wages, 2 surgeons' stubbornness, and a written loan from Saverio Lanza, so strangled with repayment clauses and exit terms that he'd called it, personally, an insult to the whole institution of generosity. She'd signed it with the pen in her own hand. Above the door, in plain letters, it said Ambulatorio Santa Rosa, for a grandmother who had died in a corridor because the loud men decided the paying patients came first, and for the free trauma point that would make sure, in that quarter at least, no one ever would again. Ezio ran the reconstruction side and remained exactly what he had always been, a good man, a good partner, and no threat to anyone, a fact Saverio had come to accept with a grace that surprised them both. Tancredi, heart healed and behavior not, became the clinic's unofficial mascot, sitting with frightened patients in the waiting room, showing the children his scar, telling everyone who'd listen that his aunt had once sewn his heart shut with her bare hand while it was still beating and that it was, in his professional opinion, disgusting. Ippolita Dano came by exactly once, on some errand of curiosity, and referred to Ondina, within her hearing, as the market quarter surgeon who'd stolen a king. Tancredi crossed the room and stood at Ondina's side before she could answer. She didn't steal him, the boy said. She noticed a wound the rest of us had started calling loyalty. There's a difference. And I'm not a market quarter surgeon, Ondina added, and handed Ippolita a card. I'm the clinic's founder, but if you're ever bleeding on a floor and the private hospitals are too far up the coast, my rates are on the back. They're very reasonable. I only charge people who can pay. Ippolita did not take the card. Tancredi held it out and looked at her until she did. Corrado, she heard, had moved north. She discovered she had to work to remember the shape of his voice, and then, one day, discovered she couldn't find it at all, that the last place it had lived, the tremor in her hands, had gone quiet. She operated now with the whole world watching, teaching residents over an open chest, narrating every stitch to a gallery of students, and her hands were steady as stone. Not because no one was watching, because she had finally, fully, stopped waiting to fail. Saverio still ran the things he ran. He still made decisions she did not ask about and took calls at hours no honest business kept. He was not a soft man, and she had never asked him to become one. But at her door, at the flat, restored, hers, her name on the lease, he knocked. He asked before he changed things. When he forgot, she reminded him, and when he got defensive about the reminding, Tancredi would leave his side and go stand by Ondina, which Saverio considered a betrayal of the highest order and which happened at least weekly. On the first cold evening of autumn, Ondina sat at her own table in her own flat, mending the strap of Tancredi's old watch, the copper pot steaming on the stove, the rose-painted tin on the shelf above it, empty of banknotes now. The clinic built and holding instead a fistful of wild fennel drying for the winter's soup. Saverio was at the window with his sleeves rolled up, scowling at a jar of tomatoes he could not open, refusing help. There are limited ways to open a jar, she said. You've found the one that doesn't work. It's defective. It's the same jar it was when I opened it yesterday. He set it down, defeated, and looked at her, and something in his face was the boy from the doorway, and the king from the blood, and the man from the floor all at once. He picked up his coat off the hook. Tancredi, he said. Come, your appointment's at 8. The boy, sprawled by the warmth of the stove, did not move. Tancredi. Nothing. Ondina folded her arms and did not hide her smile. He's refusing to leave again. Saverio looked at his brother, and at the woman, and at the small, warm, crooked room that held everything either of them had ever actually wanted, and none of the things they'd once thought they needed. He set the coat back down. He's always had good instincts, he said. He crossed to the door and put his hand on it, and did not open it, the most dangerous man in Palermo, waiting at a threshold in a room so small his shoulder nearly touched the frame. And me, he said, should I go tonight? Months earlier, the question would have frightened her, because every answer near Corrado had carried a price. But with this man, after everything, after the blood and the soup and the cage and the floor and the boy who walked across a city, no had stayed. No and stay had stayed a choice. She remembered a night on a hospital ward, a lifetime ago, telling him he was teaching a very dangerous man how much he liked being told to sit down. She'd meant it as a warning. It had turned out to be a promise. She crossed the small room and took the coat from his hands and hung it back on the hook beside her own. Stay, she said. And Saverio Lanza, the man Palermo lowered its voice for, the king who had gone 11 years without hearing the word no, kissed her slowly and stayed. Tancredi had chosen her after one grin in a room full of his own blood. His brother had taken longer and cost more, and nearly broken them both, learning the difference between a wall and an open hand. But once Ondina Vella asked him to stay, the most dangerous man in Sicily became at last the easiest thing in the world to keep.